Hi, my name is Tim Federwitz, Consulting Architect in the End User Computing Center of Excellence. Today I will be presenting Getting Started with Persona Management. We will cover a brief introduction to View Persona Management, discuss some of the intended use cases as well as unintended use cases, go over the basic architecture and deployment, and finally discuss some of the best practices. Introduction to View Persona Management. View Persona Management was one of the major feature releases introduced with View 5.0. View Persona Management will be the sole focus of this presentation. View Persona Management enables customers to provide a dedicated desktop experience while deploying floating desktops by preserving the user persona between sessions. View Persona Management is different than roaming profiles and has no dependence on roaming profiles, but works seamlessly with existing Windows roaming profiles deployments at customer sites. View Persona Management uses just-in-time file retrieval of user data and therefore reduces peak IOPS during log-on, log-off storms compared with Windows roaming profiles. View Persona Management uses standard CIFS shares with no database or back-end infrastructure requirements. It does not require Windows roaming profiles, but will support existing roaming profile users. It supports Windows XP, Vista, and 7, and reduces virtual desktop total cost of ownership by enabling more users with stateless floating desktop pools while maintaining user persona between sessions. It enables business continuity / disaster recovery for user persona by separating that data off the virtual machines and storing files in their native format on a central file server. Centralized and simple IT administration configurable by GPO, Group Policy Objects. It is scalable persona solution with no database or logon scripts to impede scalability and provides faster user login time. Planned to be released with View 5.1, View Persona Management will support physical devices as well as virtual devices with the same great features it already contained. It will be able to provide one persona management strategy for all devices. It will facilitate one-time physical to view migrations, allowing for easy PC repurposing. It will more easily facilitate the ability to use both physical and virtual desktops. However, it still requires the same OS version for full compatibility due to Type 1 and Type 2 profile differences. That will be discussed later in more detail. So a quick recap, it supports Windows XP, Vista, and 7. The caveat being that Windows XP has Type 1 user profiles, and Vista and 7 have Type 2 profiles. It's compatible with Microsoft roaming profiles, does not require a successful log-off, and it's optimized to work with ThinApp. It also installs as part of the View agent. Now we're going to discuss some View Persona Management use cases. The intended uses are preserving profiles in the View desktop. It reduces storage I/O during login and log-off storms. View Persona Management provides stateless desktop users with a consistent persona across logins. It also gives IT the cost and scalability benefits of the stateless architecture, while reducing IOPS associated with standalone Windows roaming profile implementations. View Persona Management is not a desktop composition or layering technology. It is also not a standalone profile management solution that supports all platforms. In View 5.0, it is not a utility to migrate users to Windows 7 from XP, but this functionality will be available in future versions. It also is not a centrally managing user settings, data, or workspace. The appropriate use cases for View Persona Management are stateless, floating assignment linked clone pools. This is where users get different desktops when they log into View. The desktops are destroyed along with any changes in data when the users perform a logout. View persona management will synchronize the data and changes to a centralized profile store so it is available on the next desktop the user receives, providing the perception of a persistent desktop. Multi-desktop. Users are assigned to multiple desktop pools. Whether the desktop pools the user is assigned to are persistent or floating assignment, by default, the user persona will not be maintained across different desktop pools without some form of persona management. View persona management will synchronize the user's data and changes across the desktop pools so their experience is consistent. Redirection. Folder redirection to roam user-authored data. Folder redirection for user-authored data can allow a user to access their data across both virtual and physical desktops. This should not be confused with application settings across virtual and physical. Some inappropriate use cases for view persona management. Multi-OS. A user has access to both XP and 7 desktop pools. This is not recommended as Windows XP uses Type 1 profiles and Windows 7 as well as Vista use Type 2 profiles. View persona management will create separate profiles for each different profile type. However, if the users do not make application or settings changes, this can be a valid use case as long as folder redirection is used for any user-authored data they may create. Similar characteristics apply to differing application versions like Microsoft Office because those different versions of software actually store their data and settings in different file and folder locations. OS migration. A company wants to migrate from XP to 7. Similar to the previous use case, view persona management creates separate profiles for Type 1 and Type 2 operating systems. Therefore, the user settings and data would not be the same between the two operating systems. In future versions, a one-time XP to 7 migration will be available. However, if the user is consistently using both XP and 7 desktops during the course of their work, those settings will not be maintained across the two versions. Physical and virtual. Users use both physical and virtual desktops. View persona management is only supported on virtual desktops in View 5.0. For this use case, we recommend using folder redirection for as many folders as possible to keep data consistent between the physical and virtual desktops. Future versions, starting with View 5.1, will provide the ability to manage both physical and virtual. The Type 1 versus Type 2 profile version incompatibility remains, though. We'll now discuss briefly view persona management architecture. View persona management is deployed and managed through group policy objects, also known as GPOs. These GPOs can be delivered via Active Directory through organizational units, also known as OUs, or locally on a parent VM. Active Directory deployments will provide more centralized management, but there are use cases where local parent VM deployments provide more flexibility. It uses the volume shadow service for data synchronization, and it can be used with other profile management solutions. Another key thing is that view persona management is internationalized. Therefore, it's easily used in other countries and other languages. View persona management contains a kernel-level device driver that is installed with the View agent. This allows the user persona to be loaded before the user is logged into the desktop. The use of the volume shadow service allows for data synchronization without the requirement of a logoff event. This further speeds up the logoff process compared to a solution like Windows roaming profiles. The Central Profile Store, also known as CPS, utilizes standard CIFS/SMB shares. For those of you that don't know, CIFS stands for Common Internet File System, and SMB stands for Server Message Block. Both of these refer to standard Windows file shares. Because of this, it supports the use of Windows Distributed File System, also known as DFS, for data redundancy. View persona management is scalable because there's no back-end database requirement. There's also no software installed on the central profile store. Just in time. The volume shadow service allows for timely synchronization, and files can be fetched when needed, not all up front like Windows roaming profiles. The use of registry block copies provides very quick capture of settings and changes. We'll quickly touch on the deployment aspects of view persona management. As already stated, view persona management is deployed using a group policy ADM template file that you add to a GPO. You can deploy the GPO locally to a parent VM or centrally manage it through Active Directory GPOs applied to OUs. User persona data is stored on a central profile store or a CIFS/SMB share. User data folders can be redirected. Creating the central profile store. It's important to apply the correct folder permissions for the profile store per the KB article listed here. As you see in this KB article, one of the settings that was left out of the documentation that is published is that the view persona profile remote repository requires read attributes for the NTFS permissions. The documentation references using Microsoft Windows profile, share, and permission settings. However, in that Microsoft knowledge base article, they do not list read attributes as a requirement. In some instances with view persona management, this has been a requirement. So this knowledge base article brings that to your attention. I'm going to discuss the steps for deploying view persona management using Active Directory group policy management on an organizational unit, or OU. This can be replicated locally on a parent VM using the local group policy management plugin. The first thing you need to do is create a GPO on the appropriate OU for your View desktops. Once that is created, you're going to edit the GPO to add the View Persona Management ADM template into it. So you right-click the GPO, select Edit. Once you have that open, browse down to the Computer Configuration, Policies, and then Administrative Templates. Right-click that and add Remove the template. You now need to browse for that ADM template file. The ADM file is actually installed on the View connection server. You can either browse over the network to that location, or you can copy it to the parent VM or the computer that you're managing Active Directory from. Once that ADM template file is installed in the GPO, you need to browse the GPO to the View Persona Management settings. As you can see, I am using a Windows 2008 Active Directory. Because of this, the ADM template files are actually stored underneath of administrative templates and then further underneath classic administrative templates. You can see ADM in parentheses. Once you expand that, you will see VMware View Agent Configuration and then Persona Management. Underneath of Persona Management are all of the folders containing all of the settings for View Persona Management. At a minimum, you're going to need to enable the Manage User Persona setting. Without enabling that, View Persona Management will do nothing. Even if you set something for every other configuration object in this ADM template, unless Manage User Persona is enabled, View Persona Management will do nothing. You can configure the persona repository location path here as well, right underneath Manage User Persona. You can also apply folder redirection underneath of the folder redirection folder. An important note is to specify the %username% variable and the end folder in the destination. As you can see in this screenshot, I am specifying a location, folder redirection location for my documents. I have the //server/share, then I have /%username%, and then / the end folder. In this case, I'm calling it documents. There are a few reasons why this is a requirement and why I'm pointing it out. If you simply put that folder without the %username% variable in front of it in that share, it will create that folder for the first user that logs in. It will also set the permissions so that only that user has access to that folder. So if you set that setting without the %username% value for all users, only that first user will be able to actually gain access to that folder. Another setting here or a mistake that some people make is that they put in the server/share and then they only put the %username% value and not the end folder, assuming that the product will add that end folder to the end of the share. That is not the case, and it will create a folder of that username. And any other redirected folder that you specify in that %username% will also all fall under that same username folder. One thing to note, View Persona Management will create a shortcut on the desktop for the user that points to the redirected folder. In the case of using only %username%, the user will see a username folder for each of these redirected folders, and then all of the data that they put in those folders will all fall under one folder. So this is pretty important. Another requirement is to enable loopback processing so that the computer settings, and as you see, all of the View Persona Management settings fall under the computer configuration administrative template policies. So enabling loopback processing allows computer settings to get applied as user settings. By default, the GPO will be set to be applied to all authenticated users. This is any user that falls under the domain and has the ability to authenticate to that computer. That may be fine and works for you. However, you may want to further refine that and control it by an Active Directory group that is specific to persona users only. Therefore, if an administrator logs in and is not a member of View Persona, they will not have their persona stored or controlled by View Persona Management. So this provides another level of control. Again, authenticated users will work, but if you want finer control, this is another setting that you can use. We're going to discuss some View Persona Management best practices. Again, these are best practices. These are not requirements. They're suggestions. And your mileage may vary. Depending upon your use case, some of these may not apply. We recommend that you redirect as many folders as possible for a couple reasons. It somewhat future-proofs your solution in the sense that you have the ability to provide user-authored data across multiple versions of Windows, but it also minimizes the amount of data that is stored on that central profile store. One of the reasons being that in order to speed up that login process as much as possible, you may have that central profile store on a higher tier or higher performance storage than you do for the user authored data. So it allows you to use a less expensive storage tier for that user authored data, which will most likely take up a lot more room than application settings and things of that nature that are in the central profile store when you are redirecting folders. Another key is that if you are using Outlook and roaming the local settings folder, make sure that you disable Exchange Cached mode. This can be configured using the Office GPO templates. The reason being that Exchange Cache mode will actually copy down the entire user's inbox, and some organizations are allowing users to have as much as gigabytes of data in their Exchange mailbox. In the instance where you are using a floating pool where the user persona is created each time, it's going to create a lot of I/O and a lot of storage requirement as it tries to pull down the entire mailbox of the user. So something to think about. Again, if using a floating pool and refreshing or deleting the desktops at logoff, make sure to disable the delete local profile at logoff setting. By default, this is already disabled, but we are pointing it out because if you enable delete local profile at logoff, it will actually slow down that logoff process and lengthen the time it takes for that desktop to delete or refresh. You can also use the interval for performing registry optimization setting on the timing adjustments page to adjust how frequently the registry is replicated. Here we reference a Windows 7 optimization guide that is available publicly on VMware's site. Make sure to look for the updated version that includes not disabling volume shadow version, or the volume shadow service. In addition, it will not disable the bits service, which is also a requirement for view persona management. And one other point that I'm just reiterating because I've covered it already is that with redirected folders, simultaneous XP and 7 could be supported, but it would be limited to user-authored data. So that is important. Any application settings or different application version settings and changes, again, that's going to fall into that Type 1, Type 2 user profile. However, if you redirect the user-authored data, it is something that is usable. And here are some additional resources. So there is a VMware View Persona Management Deployment Guide, and that provides detailed information on View Persona Management best practices for deployment. Again, best practices are really based on use case. They are not requirements, they are suggestions, and it's something that you need to evaluate against your specific use case. And so each different use case would really theoretically have a different set of best practices associated with it. In addition, under the View 5 technical publications, there is a View Persona Management step-by-step setup in the View Administration Guide. And that concludes this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you have any questions, please definitely submit those to the support forum. Thank you.